Hello everybody, it is Kate here for our Spotfire session. No screen today, no writing on blackboards or whiteboards. I'm just going to talk to everybody today, and look, if you've got any questions or any queries, please ask them along the way, and hopefully I will be able to see them. Bill's there, so that's really cool. So I can answer any questions that you've got. So today we're talking about working with family, and the reason I've raised this is that it often comes up in many of the discussions that I have with people about how to work with family, and there's often instances where I've worked with teams where there are family members working together or who might own the business, and there's this feeling that things are not fair because family members tend to get priority over others. So I think the number one thing I'm going to say with respect to working with families is this: boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. I am very privileged that I also work with some of my family members. So my daughter Lucy does some of my social media for me, and my son Tom does some editing and helps me with some film work and photography and the like. And particularly with Lucy and I, we because we're very close, we had to work out some boundaries around how we work together, because we need to work out how we're going to make that work, because what we were finding was, well, probably Lucy was finding it more than me, is that I would continue to talk about my work things on weekends and out of hours. And there was a blurring between our relationship, which was my parent-child, adult-to-adult relationship, versus a contractor to contractee, or whatever the name is. And I would blur the lines there when I used to raise work issues outside of work. Now, I'm not going to say that we're perfect, but there is sort of a better delineation now about that when it's Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, yes, we can talk about work things and I can raise those issues. But when we're talking about family, when we're outside of work hours, then work is not on the agenda. It's not something that we can talk about. Now, she will probably tell you that I break that rule on a fairly regular basis. And I hope that's not true, but it might be true some of the time, depending on what's going on. But it is really, really important to set some firm boundaries about, one, how you make decisions within that business, and how you speak to each other and the like. So I'm going to run through a few examples of issues that come up in family business situations that I've seen on a regular basis that do tend to cause a bit of grief. And it really does come down to having boundaries. And what boundaries means is that you've got a bit of risk management in place. So you've got you've thought through the consequences of certain things happening before they happen, because it's extraordinary how often things do go wrong and issues do arise. So it depends on the relationship that you've got with family. So if you're a husband and wife team, or brother and sister, or whatever, generally you're very, very close, and you can sort of preempt a whole lot of thinking and the like. And so as a result of that, one of the consequences is that a lot of information is taken for granted, that this is the way we make decisions, this is the way we do things, because we've always done it this way, and therefore there's an assumption that this will continue. The problem with that is that when something goes wrong, you don't have a strategy for how to deal with it, and things can go wrong on a fairly regular basis. So and often what we find is that we start a business together on the basis that we couldn't get other work, or it was a really good idea and we thought we could work well together, and a whole range of different things. But when push comes to shove and we get very stressed, or if the business is not successful, or somebody wants to leave, then suddenly there can be a difficult situation, a difficult conversation to have about how you deal with those next steps. So what I would strongly encourage anybody who is in business with a wife or a brother or sister is that you take some time out, the old slow down to speed up, take some time out to sit down and try and anticipate anything and everything that could possibly go wrong, and just work out some strategies about how you think you would deal with that, and write them down so that when it does happen, you can go back and you can refer to your notes and you say, well, we agreed that we were going to do this. And that's going to make it easier to make decisions when things go wrong, because it's really important that you have a very clear decision-making process. You also need to work out who's the boss. So what often happens in a lot of family businesses is that where there's one or, where there's two or more members of the family working together, if you are all directors of the business, if you are trying to run this business together, at some stage, someone is going to have to play boss, is going to have to make a difficult decision. So it's incredibly important that you identify that you identify somebody who's going to be the spokesperson or who's going to be able to make some of those difficult decisions. And I'm going to have some tea to deal with that. So you need to work out who's the boss. There always needs to be one person that can ultimately take the lead, take the running on a situation. Now, you might separate different elements of the business between each of you so that you have the running on certain elements, but you just need to be really clear about which bits that you're responsible for and which bits somebody else is responsible for, so that you don't have disputes going forward about the way in which a decision was made. If you've worked it out and designated somebody to manage HR, then you have to accept that they have got the running on HR, and you have to accept their decisions. Now, you may disagree with things, but that's a different conversation about how decisions are made. But in the day-to-day running of the business, if one person's responsible for HR, then you need to let them go and be responsible for HR. You don't want to blur those boundaries. So get some clarity about the way in which you manage risk and who is going to be responsible for what. What I then see on a regular basis, and like a very regular basis within business, is that if there are external staff employed in addition to family members, that it is very easy for there to be a sense of favoritism towards family members. And the way in which you deal with that is to make sure that people have job and person specs as much as possible, so that everybody's roles and responsibilities are clearly defined. You also need to have a decision-making process, so that if somebody's going to be sent to a conference or somebody's going to get special training, whatever, you need to have a process so that everybody can put their name in the hat and have an opportunity to participate. Because if you only ever send family members to training or to conferences or the like, then it would be reasonable to assume from the other staff that favoritism is alive and well in this business, and only family members get special treatment. And that then builds resentment, and then the chances of the business being successful are completely reduced, because it's not a fair working space. It's not a fair working environment. So I want you to think about how you make decisions in your workplace if you are working in a family business, and how do you make those decisions about who gets training, who gets what are the roles and responsibilities of everybody in the business. The other thing that you need to be mindful of is the language that you use towards other members of your family when you are at work. I have seen family members speak to other family members the way they might speak to them at home, which is not the way in which they would speak to other staff at the workplace. So they might be rude, they might yell, they might grunt, they might call them inappropriate names like pet names or whatever, that make other staff feel uncomfortable. And you have to be incredibly mindful of the language that you use around other staff. And so when you're at work, work is work. Now, I appreciate life-work balance and all of those things, but if you've decided to work together in that work environment, it's very important that you are incredibly professional. And I think the onus is actually higher on staff, on businesses that are family businesses, to make sure that when they're at work, they always speak to each other in a highly professional manner to ensure that other employees do not feel uncomfortable, because they can never be family. They'll never know the in-jokes. They'll never know the nuances that come from that family in the way a family member does. And it's not a fair or comfortable playing field for people who are not members of the family to work in. So it's important that you think about those things as well. So it's really about boundaries and conversations, and having conversations before something becomes a problem. And if somebody does something or speaks in a way that does sound inappropriate, and it does sound like it's special family language, it's appropriate for staff to speak up and say, I feel uncomfortable when you speak to your wife like that, or I feel uncomfortable when you yell at your daughter, and then pretend that nothing's happened, because we're all here and we all know it. And the bottom line is that if you're yelling at staff, and whether if they're a family member or whatever, if you continue that way in which you speak at home to family, people around you are going to feel really uncomfortable, and potentially you're embarrassing and shaming your own family member in front of staff members. So be mindful of that. And finally, what I would strongly recommend is that that if there is a board or a decision-making body that is responsible for the running of the business, that it is incredibly useful to have somebody who's not a member of a family included in that process, because it's very easy for family to just revert back to known behaviours. But if you get somebody who's not part of the family, or even better, more than one person who's not a member of the family, then suddenly you're accountable to much more professional standards than you would be if you were just hanging out with family. So we need to have checks and balances in family businesses, or when we're working with family, to make sure that people feel respected, to make sure that we're not acting in a way that would be to the detriment of the family members, or to the other staff. Sometimes family members get special treatment in that they don't get paid enough. They're sort of taken advantage of. I know somebody who worked in their dad's restaurant for many, many years for free, because it was the family business and that's what you did. And eventually that builds resentment as well. So it's important that there is some recognition of work that's carried out on behalf of the business, and that's reflected by way of payment as well. So there are my tips and tricks about working with family. It is always complex. If there's a dispute between family members, that can really make life difficult for other staff to deal with, because they're not part of that dispute, and it's very difficult for them to help resolve those disputes. So if something comes to a head, it's better to deal with it as quickly as possible rather than to let it play out over a long period of time, because it just creates so much stress within the work environment for all of the other employees over a long period of time. So I'm going to leave it there for now, but thank you so much for your time today. It is a public holiday, but we've saved this on the into the Spotfire Session YouTube channel and to my Conflict Coach YouTube channel, so you'll get to see this there. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of this public holiday, and I will see you all again soon. Cheers. Bye.